It creates problems everywhere, not only in Canada. I gave an interview with the BBC, and they're having problems in Europe as well and around the world. So he'll do his best. I know him well, and I'm very confident.
It's a tough job, but you don't get in this job to have an easy job. I was Parliament Hill for 40 years, and it was fun. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Jean Chrétien.
They seem to be trotting Chrétien out. We didn't see him much throughout Trudeau's tenure. I think that they're probably just trying to bank on the nostalgia of Chrétien to say, I endorse this new guy, since they still need to get elected. He doesn't even have a seat. I don't know if it's the first time. I should look that up. I don't think it is. Kim Campbell, possibly. But yeah, it would be one of the rare times that a prime minister has been not elected and then doesn't have a seat in parliament. Okay, I did the research. Canadian history has had several people that have slid into power without winning an election or even having a seat in the House of Commons. Carney, a central bank poster boy, parachuting in to be the new Prime Minister of Canada. It isn't that wild of a concept when you look at history. If you go back to 1984, Pierre Trudeau, the original Trudeau, not the sock enthusiast drama teacher who was previously in charge, most recently. When he retired, John Turner stepped in to fill his shoes. The catch was that Turner didn't have a seat in Parliament when he became Prime Minister. He basically just grabbed the reins of the Liberal Party and got handed the keys to the whole government without having to sit through the mind-numbing parliamentary election, similar to Carney. And then obviously everybody knows the story of Kim Campbell in 1993, who succeeded Brian Mulroney after winning the Progressive Conservative leadership. Campbell swooped in as PM with a direct election, similar to this case with Carney, served briefly, and then promptly oversaw her party getting completely vaporized in the next general election by Jean Chrétien and the Canadian Liberals, which is classic Canadian politics. The only woman prime minister we've had has just been like completely buried in history by being set up to fail, essentially. To go back to like the OG unelected prime ministers, you got to go way back. John Abbott in 1891 became prime minister while serving in the Senate. Yes, the Senate, the place in Canada that's basically a retirement home for failed politicians, party bagmen and ex-hockey coaches and hockey players, etc. Abbott really didn't pretend to represent voters directly, yet he still was the prime minister. Mackenzie Bowell pulled the same move, 1894. Bowell wasn't just unelected. He was also wildly unpopular, yet he was sitting comfortably in the Senate and somehow also was prime minister, entirely insulated from elections and things like that. It gets even funnier if you look at William Lyon Mackenzie King, the ultimate Canadian political weird case, a guy who held seances with his dead mom for policy advice. He also briefly governed without a seat in the House of Commons. He was an admirer of Hitler, not a great person. But yeah, Mackenzie King held government without a seat, managed, similar to what Carney is doing, not once but twice. He lost his seat in 1925, and again in 1945, he kept his job as PM without technically representing anyone. And imagine losing your job interview and your boss saying, it's cool, just stick around and pretend like nothing happened. And that's what happened with old Mackenzie King. And then, John Turner, the guy who replaced Pierre Trudeau in 1984, he managed to serve a brief but awkward stretch without sitting in Parliament for about 3 months. Turner was PM without actually being elected or holding a common seat, and swiftly got beat, I believe, by the Mulroney Conservatives. Yeah, Carney strolling in without an election, without having been elected, without holding a seat in the Parliament. It's not unprecedented. Yeah, Canada has a long, weird history of letting unelected technocrats and party hacks take turns at the wheel without really even pretending to ask voters. Yeah, that's just the Westminster parliamentary system. It's a Canadian tradition, just shrugging off the democratic process and democratic formalities and just handing over power to the next person in line. So Carney would just be one of many carrying on a grand Canadian tradition where democracy is like a side quest. Parliamentary seats are a side quest. And the real requirement for power is just showing up and then getting the nod at the party convention at the right time. Yeah, no, Joe Clark ended up becoming in power very briefly. Pierre Trudeau was prime minister on 2 occasions. He lost to Joe Clark and then Joe Clark swiftly lost to Pierre Trudeau, like I think in 82 or maybe in 81. But I believe in 79, Joe Clark beat Trudeau, and then he did the double fake, claimed he was going to retire from politics, and then did the fucking Rocky 2 comeback, came back, and then managed to get reelected and was there for the Canada Constitution Act and et cetera, et cetera. Diefenbaker was the leader of the Conservatives for 11 years. He lost his seat and was was an MP until he died. But yeah, he was leader of the Conservatives from 1956 to 1967, became PM in 1957, won 3 elections, lost in 63 to Pearson, and then remained party leader, led the party to another election in 65, also lost to Pearson. Then he was no longer the party leader, but still was the MP, and then held his seat until 1979. The other thing we were talking about, King, William Lyon Mackenzie King, a very eccentric, weird dude, probably one of the not the top prime minister of choice, I would say. He made political decisions famously by chatting with his dead mom and his favorite dog. He managed to govern without having a seat in parliament, like I said, twice on 2 separate occasions. He got booted out by voters and still kept running the country anyway. And the way that was possible, it turns out that the Canadian Constitution is more like a vibe check rather than a rigid rule book, because it doesn't explicitly say that the Prime Minister has to sit in the House of Commons, just that they're usually the leader of the party with the most seats. So that's the constitutional gray zone, exactly how King stayed in charge despite losing his seat in the 1925 election. Normally, you'd think losing your own seat would be career-ending humiliation, but King, the classic fail son, essentially didn't really blink. And because Canada doesn't strictly demand its leader actually sit in Parliament, he just shrugged, kept running the government, and planned to hop back into the House of Commons at the first available by-election. And it was a move that would probably get you impeached or laughed off the political stage in other countries, but in Canada, it was just another quirky constitutional loophole. And then he did it again 20 years later. After the 1945 federal election, King lost his seat once again. Zero panic. Instead, he simply governed as if nothing had changed, totally confident he'd grab another by-election victory down the road. It worked because the Liberal Party backed him without hesitation. They knew King's power wasn't in holding some specific parliamentary seat, but in being the guy who could keep their whole political machine running. And nobody in the party was ready to challenge him because he had become the indispensable man. So it wasn't democratic purity, it was like raw political calculus. Yeah. If I go over that again, how did it work? So Mackenzie's ability to govern without a seat in the House of Commons on 2 occasions was due to the unique nature of the Canadian parliamentary system and King's political acumen. King remained the leader of the Liberal Party even after losing his seat in 1925 and 45. In Canada, the Prime Minister is typically the leader of the party that holds the most seats, not necessarily. So constitutional flexibility. The Canadian Constitution does not explicitly require the Prime Minister hold a seat in the House of Commons. This flexibility allowed King to continue leading the government despite not being an elected PM. After the 1925 election, King's Liberals did not win the most seats, but managed to form a minority government with support from the Progressive Party. This allowed King to remain Prime Minister despite losing his own seat. It's so fucking hilarious. If that happened now, people would absolutely riot. Oh, yeah. In both cases, King's lack of a seat was a temporary situation. He likely intended to run in a by-election to regain a seat in the House of Commons as soon as possible. King's position as the party leader and his political influence within the Liberal Party allowed him to maintain control even without a seat. The party continued to support him as their leader and prime minister. That's hilarious.